Hi class, welcome to your lecture on the parts of a cell. Each cell contains many organelles. We are going to talk about three different types of cells in particular: a plant cell, an animal cell, and a bacterial cell. And if you do not have your paper out in front of you that is your analogy guide for the organelles, you need to stop the video, go ahead and go to Vision and print that out, or get the one that I gave you in class available for you to take notes on during this lecture. We'll start with the nucleus. The nucleus is the control center or brain of the cell, and only plants and animals cells have a nucleus. So they're in all eukaryotic cells. So that means they're also in protists and fungus. Eukaryotic, if you remember the meaning of that, it means true nucleus. Karyote like nugget or kernel, and the prefix eu, EU, means true. So all eukaryotic cells do contain a nucleus. The nucleus in and of itself is the home for the DNA. It is the protection that surrounds your genetic information. And in your organelle analogy sheet, as part of an M&M factory, it would be the command center, which is that controls the entire factory. So this is a picture of a nucleus opened up, and it is composed of a couple different parts here. So the nuclear envelope is what is surrounding it, and you see little holes in that. It is made of the same phospholipid bilayer that makes up the cell membrane, and the nucleolus is what is inside of it. It's that center core, and it is responsible for making all of the ribosomes that are outside of your cell that read the DNA and turn it into a protein. If you look at that anatomy of a nucleus, you can also see, besides the nuclear envelope and the nucleolus, that you have chromatin. Chromatin is the DNA itself when it's not coiled. So when it's very loosely, thin, stringy, it would be invisible under a microscope at that stage. And that is called chromatin. That is how DNA typically is. Only before it divides, and when it replicates, it will supercondense into chromosomes. The cytoplasm of the cell is the jelly-like fluid that is inside of the cell, where all of the organelles kind of float within it, and it kind of holds them in place. So your comparison here is that the cytoplasm would be kind of like Jell-O. Every time you see the word cyto, C-Y-T-O, as a prefix, that means cell. So all cells, every single type of cell, has cytoplasm. It has that fluid inside of there. Ribosomes are the smallest little organelle within a cell. They are in all cells, and they are responsible for making the proteins. So inside your factory, they would be the M&M machines, manufacturing machines. So they make proteins for the cell, and all eukaryotic cells, they can be floating freely, or they can be attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. So they're called free ribosomes, or they're on the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And it's called the rough endoplasmic reticulum because with the ribosomes attached to the outside, it looks bumpy. Prokaryotic cells do not have an endoplasmic reticulum, so in all prokaryotic cells and all bacteria, they're just going to be free-floating. The endoplasmic reticulum, also known as the ER, comes in two different forms: the rough endoplasmic reticulum and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. It is only in eukaryotic cells. So it would be on your sheet, it's in plant and animal cells, but not in bacteria. And it's a membrane of networks that transports lipids and proteins through the cell. The rough endoplasmic reticulum in particular has those ribosomes on it. So proteins will get made at the ribosome and go right into that rough endoplasmic reticulum for further processing and packaging, whereas the smooth endoplasmic reticulum will process and manufacture the lipids or the fats. The M&M factory analogy is that The endoplasmic reticulum are the carts in the factory that transport the M&Ms around and deliver messages and materials to different parts of the cell. The Golgi apparatus, it can also be called the Golgi body, the Golgi apparatus, sometimes just the Golgi. So anytime you see the word Golgi, regardless of what is after it, apparatus, body, nothing or anything, it's talking about that same set of membranes. So it's a series of flat membrane bound sacs that process proteins that are made by the ribosomes and pack them into vesicles. The vesicles are these little transport circles. They're pieces of the Golgi that have pinched off and now house the protein inside, and they can take it outside of the cell or they can take it to different places within the cell. So the Golgi body would be the sorters and packers of the factory. They're kind of organizing and sorting everything to where it needs to go, final touches, getting it ready for shipment. Vesicles within the cell are parts of the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi body that have pinched off, and they are taking proteins to different areas of the cell. So they are just like a little storage box for the proteins. So in your organelle sheet, you're going to put down that for the M&M factory, vesicles are going to be the storage box. Because they're part of the endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi that have pinched off, the membrane is again made of that same phospholipid bilayer. And they're going to be in plant and animal cells, but not in bacteria, because bacteria don't have those complex organelles like the endoplasmic reticulum or the Golgi body. Those are only in eukaryotic cells. A lysosome is a special type of vacuole that holds nutrients and digests them. It has digestive enzymes in it, so it breaks it down so that the cell can use the components in there for fuel. So they're in plants and animal cells. They're small round organelles with a single membrane. They're digestive organelles, so they do contain digestive acids inside there. They can kind of pump the acids in and break down any large molecules to eliminate waste. So they get rid of, to lyse something means to break it apart, and some, S-O-M-E, when it's talking about that, the suffix means body. So it's breaking something down, a body that breaks things down. And in the factory, it would be like the garbage collectors. So the lysosomes would break down anything that's unneeded. It would also help to destroy like old non-functioning organelles and everything. So get rid of the waste in the cell so that nothing builds up. The mitochondria are in animal and plant cells. They are not in bacterial cells. They're actually about the same size as a lot of bacterial cells. They're large oval organelles. They have a double membrane. You can see the membrane on the outside, and then there's an inner kind of folded up membrane. They provide the energy for the cell. They convert large organic molecules into energy, so they're ATP. So you're talking about like taking glucose, the sugars and stuff like that from the cell, and turning it into energy. And it's through a process called cellular respiration. We will get further into the process of cellular respiration later in the year. So because they provide energy in the form of ATP for the cell, they power everything that goes on within your cell. So for the M&M factory analogy, they would be the power plant of the factory. Chloroplasts are only in plant cells. They're not in animal cells, and they are not in bacteria. They are large green organelles. They have an outer membrane and they have an inner membrane, and that inner membrane looks like a stack of coins. They're responsible for making sugar through the process of photosynthesis, and a byproduct of that is also oxygen, which we breathe. So the M&M factory analogy would be that it would be the cafeteria of the factory. For plants, the chloroplasts are responsible for making them autotrophic. So it makes the food that is needed for the plants. Takes sunlight plus water plus carbon dioxide and converts that into sugar and oxygen. So the chloroplasts are responsible for the process of photosynthesis, and they're the ones that make the food for plants. Mitochondria and chloroplasts are both very similar to bacteria in that they're both surrounded by two membranes. They're about the same size as bacteria. They have their own ribosomes and circular DNA in them, just like bacteria, and they can divide by binary fission, also just like bacteria. Cilia. These are little short-like hairs that are going to be on the outside of cells to help them move. And they can be, they're in the M&M factory, they would be like security alarm sensors. So they help with sensing things that are nearby, and they are also help a little bit with movement. And they can be in all types of cells, plant, animal, and bacteria. Flagella. These are long whip-like tails that help cells to move. Flagella are going to be seen in animal cells on sperm. They're the most famous example of a cell that has flagella, and they're also going to be on bacterial cells. Vacuoles are large organelles used for storing water and waste product, and they're responsible for giving plant cells its shape. Animal cells may have one or two tiny little vacuoles, but a plant cell has a large central vacuole that, when it's full of water, keeps the plant cell rigid and taut. If you can think of a plant that has been watered and is fresh and how it stands nice and tall, and compare that to a plant if you have not watered it for a couple days and it's starting to wilt, it will kind of droop and fall over. And that's because those vacuoles are no longer full of water, keeping everything structurally sound. So in the factory, the M&M factory, the vacuoles would be the water fountain of the factory. And this is a picture of a plant cell vacuole. You can see that in a plant cell, that large central vacuole will take up the majority of the space. The cytoskeleton. Cyto, again, stands for cell, and skeleton it's what gives the cell its structure. So we watched the video, The Hidden Life of the Cell, and from the BBC. If you haven't seen it, go ahead and reference it, because the way that the cytoskeleton is animated, it's just really awesome to get to see it. It's in all eukaryotic cells. It's made of proteins called microfilaments and microtubules, and it connects the cytoplasm with the cell membrane, so it just provides structure and support and a way for things to move around. Little motor proteins will be able to use the cytoskeleton as a highway and transport nutrients throughout the cell, or proteins throughout the cell, to where they need to go, using it to kind of walk on. So the little motor proteins will just carry things and walk along the cytoskeleton. Again, if you have not yet watched the Hidden Life of the Cell from the BBC, then go ahead and watch that, because it shows the cytoskeleton animation just beautifully with the motor proteins walking across it. And so in the M&M factory, you'll see the steel beams within the factory. It just gives it structure and support and makes sure that the cell isn't like collapsing in on itself. The cell membrane itself is made up of a phospholipid bilayer, and every single cell has a cell membrane. And it controls what enters and exits the cell. The membrane is called a fluid mosaic because of its consistency and composition. Fluid meaning it moves. It is not rigid. Things move around within the structure of the cell membrane. And it has different things embedded within the membrane itself. It has transport proteins, carbohydrates, different cholesterols and fats, and it can allow things in or out of the cell. We will talk more about that when we get into cell transport, where we'll focus directly in on the cell membrane and see exactly how things get transported across that barrier. So in the M&M factory, it would be like the security guards. They let people in and out. And in order to get in, you have to have the right key. We also saw that in the Hidden Life of the Cell video when you watch that, when you were able to see the virus need a special key to lock in to one of those proteins that was on the cell membrane before the cell opened up and let it in. The cell wall is a rigid wall that surrounds the cell membrane, and it protects the cell, it gives it shape. It's in plant cells and prokaryotic cells. It would also be in fungus cells and in some protists, but animal cells absolutely do not have a cell wall. The cell wall in plants is made up of cellulose. In fungus, it's made up of chitin. And it gives the plant cells this rectangular shape. And that's why they were actually called cells. They were first seen in cork, which is a plant, and so they looked like little rectangles. Have a great day.